you're here for committing, murder. Like you killed somebody. I'm a scumbag.
Oh, you're saying people in the prison were watching it?
Yeah, guys in prison are like, bro, that's up. I'm up. You make methamphetamine for a living. You were selling it to school kids.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Wide Awake podcast. My name is Joshua Rubin, and I'm your host. Today, my guest is Matthew Cox. He is a former mortgage broker and convicted mortgage fraudster. During his time as a scam artist, Matthew defrauded banks for roughly $55 million. Due to his crimes, Matthew was eventually put on the Secret Service's most wanted list. When he was eventually caught, he was facing a sentence of up to 125 years in prison.
Yeah, that's good.
I must say, you don't look a day over 110.
Yeah.
So just to start off, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tampa, Florida. I grew up in an area called Temple Terrace. It's just outside of Tampa, but basically it's Tampa.
And I heard you struggled at school quite a bit.
Yeah, I have a learning disability. I have dyslexia, auditory and visual dyslexia, and I ended up having to go to schools for kids with learning disabilities. I went to a school called Center Academy and one called Yates Academy. And I eventually graduated at Yates Academy, probably with a C or a D average.
And you were put into classes with people with Down syndrome and...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tay-Sachs disease, like kids with. So when I was diagnosed with, I had failed the second grade, and but they gave me a bunch of tests, and they were like, "Well, look, this kid, he's extremely intelligent, like he's smart, but he's not able to read and write." And so they went to go put me in the classes with the kids with learning disabilities, but those classes were full. So I ended up getting placed in the classes for kids with mentally handicapped kids. And so I started running away from school, and, you're in there with, 20 kids, and they've all are 10 or 15 kids, more like not 20, but probably 10 kids, 15 kids that have, they have Down syndrome, they have mild, different forms of retardation or however you want to say it. So I start running away from school, and eventually they placed me into a school for kids with learning disabilities, strictly for kids with learning disabilities.
And one of the things that I did terribly at school as well, and I think people think if you do bad at school, you're stupid.
Yeah.
But I heard that and I know IQ tests aren't that relevant really, but I heard you did an IQ test and got a really high score. Yeah,
I think there was a couple of them. One was 139 and one was 140. So I scored out at basically a genius level. But just like you said, people say that all the time. Oh, wow, you're a genius. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Your ability to learn you learn easily, more easy than most people, but it doesn't mean you're super, super bright or you're super educated. You could be homeless and have a genius IQ. You could have very little education and have a genius IQ. Or
can be completely insane and have a genius
Absolutely.
IQ. Yeah.
Which is funny because most people with schizophrenia and mental diseases, they will have super high IQs. It's not it's necessarily a blessing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're so smart, you think you're smarter than everybody else, and you can get around everything. And I think that's probably my problem.
It was your downfall.
Yeah.
And when did you decide to become a brokerage mocha?
A mortgage broker.
Mortgage broker.
I was going to say, I don't know what that
brokerage
was.
Mocha.
So I was dating a girl that worked at a strip club, and she got hired to become a mortgage broker. And after she had done it for a few weeks, she was like, "Listen, you've got to do this." I graduated college. I have a degree in fine art, so it really prepared me for basically almost nothing. And so I ended up working construction jobs. So I'm working construction. I can barely make my bills. And she came to me and she said, "Listen, you got to do this. These guys that are actually closing loans and making great money, all they're doing is talking on the phone. They're talking on the phone, and they're doing math. You're good at math, and you're a great salesman. That's all these guys are." And I was like, "No, they're like bankers." And she's like, "They're not bankers. They're salesmen." So that's what I did. I went in and interviewed with the guy, the owner of the company, and they flew me to North Carolina. They trained me for 3 or 4 days, flew me back. In the first month, I made 8 or 10 grand or something like that. But I closed 4 loans my first month, and then it was 6, and then it was 8, and then it was 10.
And can you explain exactly what a mortgage broker does?
So
how do they operate?
So in the United States, and like I said, I don't know how it is in South Carolina. I mean, in South
Africa,
in South Africa, or New Zealand or wherever else. But in the United States, you buy a piece of property and it's on a piece of land, and there's in every county's public records, they have a plat map where they say, hey, your property's on this piece of property, or your house is on this piece of property, and here's the name, here's the number. They give it like a special parcel number, and they give it a legal description, and they actually have a place downtown where they have your title for your house. So every transaction's placed on that title, and that's why in the United States, banks will lend to you because there's a process. I want to buy this house for $200,000. I don't have $200,000, right? Like 95% of the homes in the United States have mortgages on them. So you go to the bank and you say, I want to buy this house for $200,000, and the bank says, you know what? We'll give you the money. If you put down 5%, like you put down $10,000, we'll give you $190,000. And then in public records, they go down and they place a lien on that property. So the title is in your name. The lien is in your name, but it's a lien for the bank. So you now owe, if anybody goes to look at your property, they say, hey, Josh owns this property, but he owes Bank of America $190,000. And he's making payments of $1,500 a month, let's say. And what happens is if you said, hey, you know what? Well, I bought the property. It's in my name. I'm going to sell the property. You could sell it. But as soon as you go to sell it, whoever goes to buy it is going to have someone check public records. And they're going to say, Josh, I want to buy your house, but you owe $190,000. So I'm going to give you the $200,000 you want for it. But when I give you that, the lawyer we go to is going to pay off the $190,000 and you'll get $10,000. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not like you can borrow the money from Bank of America to buy the house and then turn around and resell it and make $200,000. Like, you can't. There's a lien on it.
And when you first started working as a mortgage broker,
so I'm sorry, one more time. So a mortgage broker is the guy that finds you the loan. So the mortgage broker is the guy that says, I've looked at you, your credit, your job history, and I've determined that I'm going to bring your loan to either Bank of America, SunTrust Bank, Wachovia, FSB, whatever it is. I find you the loan, and when it closes, I get a check. I get paid a fee.
You get a percentage.
Yes, yeah.
And when you started working as a mortgage broker, did you intend on doing everything by the book?
Yeah, I did. Like committing fraud at that point hadn't even occurred to me. It wasn't something I was actively thinking about. I was just going through the motions. Like, I didn't think that was going to be an issue. But the very first loan I did, I realized that like the person didn't qualify. Like, initially they qualified, they met all the guidelines, but then she told me everything she said that my borrower said was right. Like, it was like, oh wow, you qualify. So I got all the documents together, put them in a package, showed them to my manager at the mortgage company to send off to underwriting so the person could get approved and they could get the money. Well, she looked at the package, and after she looked at it, she went, okay, well, you have this one document. Your borrower's been 30 days late on our mortgage or on our rent. And I was like, what? So if you're 30 days late on your rent payment, it's like, hey, this person pays their bills late. This isn't a good risk. So she was like, yeah, she like, it was a deal killer. It's not going to close now. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I didn't know to check the file because she said she paid her rent. I believed her. But clearly she didn't. So my manager says, look, white it out, make a copy, stick it back in the file, and it'll close. And that was like the first time I was like, wow. I was like, well, wait a minute. That's like fraud. That's fraud. And she was like, I could go to prison. I could go to jail. And she says, no, you're not going to get in trouble. Listen, she said, we do it all the time. She said, you're not going to get in trouble. She said, they're never going to catch it. And if they do catch it, she said, the worst that'll happen is you'll get fired. Nobody's calling the FBI. And I was like, and I was desperate. Like, I was broke. I needed money. And she told me it would work. So I did it. And like, probably the worst thing that could have happened was it went through. It went through. If I'd been caught and fired or something, I probably would have been too scared to ever do anything again. But I didn't. It went through, and 3 or 4 days later, the loan closed, and I got a check for like $3 or $4 grand.
And there was no issues?
Oh, none.
And when did things start to escalate?
So eventually what happened was, so now I was regularly doing this, right? Like that just emboldened me. So I'm regularly doing this stuff. And I'm closing loans, I'm changing documents. I start just getting, my fine arts degree, which prepared me for basically nothing prior to this, was extremely valuable in this particular aspect,
Aspect of the job.
I was going to say, industry.
Yeah.
So I'm changing, I'm making documents, I'm changing things, I'm altering things, I'm getting super creative. I start making, I'm doing everything. I'm making fake banks. I'm making everything. I'm making bank statements. And what happened was ultimately that company got closed down. Not because of me, but just in general, because there were other fraudulent things happening. And so they got closed down. So I ended up going to work for somebody else temporarily. And then I started my own company. Like I was at this other place a few months. And then I ended up starting my own company. And I ended up hiring a bunch of mortgage brokers to work for me. And from the get-go, they're all committing fraud.
You've obviously seen the movie The Big Short,
yes,
right?
It's a great movie.
So is that what caused the subprime mortgage crisis? Was people doing fraudulent loans?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, look, so that's a hard question. I always joke, remember The Big Short when they come down, when the hedge fund guys, they come down to Florida and they start interviewing mortgage brokers?
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Do you remember all the doofus mortgage brokers they were interviewing? They're like, look, I focus on strippers.
It was at the convention.
Yeah. And they're like, they're all like goofballs. That was my brokers. Those were all my brokers. Like, they're just idiots. Like, if it weren't for mortgages, these guys couldn't do anything else. If it weren't for real estate, they'd all be... Like, I was hiring guys. I hired a guy that used to sell used cars. I hired a guy that was worked at Pestex, like spraying around your house for pests. That's what these people did. I hired a chick that, did what did she do? She sold like cell phones. You know what I'm saying? These are just kind of salesmen kind of people. If those guidelines were not put in place, then those brokers couldn't have closed those loans. What happened was the banks started making guidelines that were very easy to manipulate or commit fraud, or they were doing, towards the end, they were doing stuff like just like no doc loans, like no documents, where basically you have a 700 credit score, you don't have to provide you don't have to prove you have a job. Well, if I don't have to prove I have a job, then I can get qualified for $1 million house when really I could probably only afford a $400,000 house. And so that's the problem, is that they started giving loans to people that simply couldn't qualify.
And people were getting like 3-4 houses.
Of course. And then people are going from getting multiple houses and renting them out thinking everything's okay. Well, eventually that bubble bursts and people start missing their payments. And of course, you can't afford to pay 4 mortgages when three people aren't paying their mortgage. You can't afford to pay those mortgages. And so the whole system starts to break down very quickly and just collapse.
And when you started your own company, were you thinking of running it legitimately, or were you like, now I own the company, I can do whatever the fuck I want?
Kind of. Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I still had to get the loans get the money from the lenders. You still have to go to the bank to get the money, but I have nobody looking over my shoulder. Not that I did before. Like, even at the first company, think about it. My manager's telling me to commit fraud. Like, nobody in that industry
was saying no.
And very seldom, there was only a couple of guys that I actually hired. And within 2 weeks, they realized, like, there's a lot of fraud happening here. And they actually were like, listen, I'm done. I can't be a part of this, and left. So that happened a few times. But for the most part, if I hired 10 people, if I hired 20 people, 19 of them had no problem with it at all. Because keep in mind, they're driving up.
They're making a lot more money.
Yeah, they're driving up in a beat up old Volkswagen, and 3 months later, they're driving a $100,000 Mercedes. And this is 15, 20 years ago, So the equivalent of driving a $200,000 Mercedes now. Like, well, what are you going to do? You could barely pay your bills before. And now you're, a year later, you're moving into $1 million house. When you lived I knew one of my brokers lived in a double wide trailer when he came to work. A year later, he moved into a place that was worth almost $1 million.
This is like the Wolf of Wall Street.
Within a year. Yeah, exactly.
And I heard that when the Secret Service investigated you, that they found that roughly 80% of all the loans your company processed were fraudulent.
Right. Well, I think that they got that from talking to some of the brokers. Like, I don't think they looked through all 80%. That's one of the ways I was able to get out of that, where I was like, how can you prove this? And they're like, well, we've talked to all the brokers, and my mortgage brokers rolled over on me immediately. They're like, listen, 8 out of 10 of these things are fraudulent, So that's where I think they came, because I don't think they couldn't possibly look through all the files. I mean, it's the FBI, they could have, but I don't think they did.
And can you just list all the different kinds of fraud you committed, just so that people know the scale of what was going on? Because right now, we're obviously talking about the very start, but just before we get into the more serious stuff, can you just list all the different kinds of fraud you committed?
So, I mean, it's funny because I actually wrote an ethics and fraud course. So there's multiple different ones. For instance, there's something called there's something called a cashback scheme, right? Where it's when I buy a property, let's say I go buy a property that's worth $300,000, but I get an appraisal for $500,000. And so the bank lends me, let's say, $500,000. I, of course, give the seller a check for $300,000 and I keep $200,000. There's no incentive for me to pay at this point. I just made $200,000. So you might make a few payments and then you go, you know what? And then you blow through the money and then you just let the thing go into foreclosure. That's called a cashback scheme. We were doing cashback scams all the time. We're also doing something called log cabin scams, right? So you buy a house, you renovate it, you do very, very little renovations. And then you sell it to somebody that maybe you know, maybe you don't know. Maybe you rent it out, you make a few payments, but it's just good enough to pass the appraisal. But it's a horrible house. Like, you didn't do a good job renovating it at all. That's a log cabin scam. I mean, basically, you're getting the bank to lend on a property that's not in good shape.
And I mean, you guys are doing fake identities, fake passports, and...
Oh, yeah. No, we're doing fake. Like, you mean as far as documents? Like, I've got...
You've just done everything.
No, I'm making fake W-2s, fake pay stubs. I'm making fake...
banks, fraudulent checks.
Social Security disbursement checks, Social Security disability checks, so that I would make a document that looked like Social Security was paying you $1,800 a month for one of your kids. Your kid's not even sick. The document's completely fake. But Social Security, when they call to try and verify it, they won't verify it. They'll verify that there's a kid, but they can't verify the funds. All they can do, the bank can do to figure it out, is you give them the letter. Here's the letter I got from Social Security. That's it. This is the award letter. They won't verify. Like, we're making, like, at one point, we're getting Social Security cards. Figured out how to go into the DMV and get them to issue me driver's licenses.
Yeah, we'll talk more about all that later, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm doing everything. I'm making fake banks, online banks.
Can you tell me about that? Because I heard that you made a bank that was so convincing that it fooled the Secret Service.
Right, yeah.
Can you tell me that story?
When the Secret Service grabbed me, this is whatever, 6 or 7 years later, when they finally grabbed me, they thought I had money hidden. They were like, we know you have money hidden, but I'd given them all the banks that I could think of. And they were like, no, you've got money hidden. And I said, why do you think that? And I remember the Secret Service agent pulls out bank statements and he puts them on the thing. He goes, we know you've got $200,000 hidden in the name of Walter Holcomb. And I looked at the bank and I almost died laughing because I'd made a website for a fake bank and I'd made everything. Like, you could call the bank, you could leave a voicemail, you could go there, you could go through the website, you could do everything. And it even had bank statements. Those bank statements I had made. So they just found them in my house in the name of one of my fake identities. And they were like, they thought it was a bank account somewhere. And I looked at him and I went, and so he goes, we know you've got $200,000 in that bank account. And I looked at him and I went, really? I go, have you been to the bank? And they go, well, I've called several times. I go, did anybody call you back? He's like, no, I've just left some messages. I'm waiting for a call back. He goes, we just subpoenaed the headquarters. And I went, really? I go, did you go to the website? And he goes, yeah. I said, what'd you think of it? And he goes, it's a bank website. What are you talking about? I go, well, what'd you think of it? It's professional. And he goes, I mean, it's a bank website. I go, yeah, but it was well done, right?
Convincing.
I go, convincing, right? And he looked at me and the Secret Service agent goes, no. Are you serious? And I went, yeah. I go, it's all an illusion.
It's not a real bank.
I go, it's not. He goes, fuck. So I remember the U.S. attorney's like, what? I don't understand what's happening. He goes, he made it up. It's a fake bank. I go, it's completely fake. There's no money in a bank account. They had subpoenaed another bank. So I used, part of this bank was similar to another bank that had been bought out. He actually subpoenaed a closed bank that had closed. It had been bought out by SunTrust Bank like 5 years earlier. He subpoenaed the wrong bank. He's like, we're waiting for the files right now. You're not getting them. So, yeah.
That's insane, eh? And a couple of years after starting your business, you got into a bit of legal trouble. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah.
How that happened?
So I had gotten married, and my wife and I ended up buying it was actually 54 rental units, right? So within a year, we get like 54 rental units. And so she just collects rent. And I'm also buying and selling property. So I'm buying properties, renovating them and selling them. One of the things I was doing was I would go buy like a quadplex or a duplex or something, right? Like a multifamily property. And I'd renovate it, and then I would sell it to my wife in her maiden name. Because there's something called seasoning. So if you buy a property for $100,000 and you put $100,000 into it, and now it's worth $300,000, the bank won't let you refinance it for 1 year. Not at the appraised value of $300,000. They're like, look, you've owned this 6 months. You bought it for $100,000. We'll let you refinance it for $100,000. Well, that doesn't get my other $100,000 in renovations back. So what I would do is I was like, okay, but it's worth $300,000. They won't let me refinance it, but I could sell it to somebody. So I would sell it to my wife at the time in her maiden name. So they didn't realize we were married. So I would sell that property to her, and she'd get a loan for 80% of $300,000, let's say. So she's getting a $240,000. So we'd make 40 grand plus get all our money back. Well, I had done that multiple times, but I didn't close those loans at my mortgage company. I closed it at a friend's mortgage company. That friend had gotten in trouble for running what's called a straw man scam. She'd run a little scam with some guys, some mobster guys, and the FBI got involved, and they came and they raided her office. And so she contacted me. She said, hey, can you meet me for lunch? I said, sure, no problem. And I knew she was in trouble. So I meet her and her husband for lunch, and I go, what's going on? She goes, look, the FBI came in, and when they got our files, they were asking questions about you and your ex-wife. And I was like, holy Jesus. I was like, really? And she was like, yeah. She said, well, you didn't tell them that I made the W-2s, did you? And she goes, Matt, we haven't answered any of the questions. I go, you didn't tell them that I own that we were married, did you? You didn't tell them, and she's like, I don't know, I'm not sure what I should tell them. And I'm like, oh my God. So I start concocting this fucking story, like, just tell them you never met her. She called in, she this, she that. Like, I'm trying to come up with, and they're like, well, we can't lie to the FBI. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Like, I just refinanced her house to get her $75,000 to pay her attorney. The same attorney that as soon as he got the $75,000, he goes, you need to turn this guy in.
So you're just spilling all your guts.
So she's wired. And I was like, and halfway through that conversation, I realized that they're wired. And I was like,
so you actually realized while you were there?
Yeah, because because when I said, what are you talking about? I said, you can't lie to the FBI. I said, you've been lying to the FBI. Like, you're still closing fraudulent loans. I just refinanced your house.
How did that feel when you realized?
Oh, it was really type. You want to talk about shock. You know, people are like, oh, I was shocked. No, bro, you don't know a shock. Like, I totally.
Your whole body goes white.
The blood drained. Like, I was like, and I realized, like, any hope I had of being able to weather that storm and maybe wiggle my way out of it, like, that was gone. I realized, like, you're wired. And I even told her, I said, wow, I hope you get something for turning me in. And she goes, I don't have to go to prison. She goes, I have kids. And I was like, I don't have kids? Like, I've got a kid. And she was like, Matt, I'm sorry. She just starts crying. I said, just tell the FBI agent to call me. Tell him not to come in my office. And I left. And then literally, it took me 15 minutes to get back to the office. I walked in, sat down in my chair, and 5 minutes later, my secretary goes, there's an FBI agent on the phone for you. I was like, oh my God. So I talked to him, and I said, he goes, we need you to come down. I mean, you know what this is about. You know, he didn't even pretend like.
Well, because he was probably listening live.
No, he was actually sitting at the table next door.
Oh no. Yeah.
But I mean, he didn't even pretend like, oh, I got a call saying you wanted to talk to me. No, he was like, yeah, you know why I'm calling.
Just
like, of course, yeah. So anyway, I went and I got a lawyer. I paid him like 75 grand, and he ended up negotiating. Like, I never talked to the FBI at that time. So he ends up convincing them to let me plead guilty and give me 3 years probation, and drop all charges against my wife at the time. So they dropped the charges against her. But in the meantime, she and I are getting a divorce. You know, we end up getting a divorce, and I can't own the mortgage company anymore. So I lose my mortgage company. I actually didn't lose it. I sold it to a guy, a friend of mine who was a CPA. So I sell it to him. He keeps me on staff as a consultant and pays me like $8,000 a month. Yeah, that's, but the problem is, you know, now I'm divorced. I have, my child support's like $2,000 a month. My ex-wife took all the properties. You know, I paid off everything she had. So I'm basically starting from scratch. And the $8,000 barely pays what my bills are every month. Maybe you think you give me $8,000, $2,000's gone already. Then there's taxes. Now you're down to $4,000. I've already got a mortgage, a car payment. My car payment's like $800 a month. You know, and it's a lease. Like that insurance. You know, by very quickly, whoop, it's gone. Especially the lifestyle I was living. Like that was nothing. So what I decided to do was I was going to start a development company with a couple of guys, but we didn't have any money to do a development company. So we went into this area of Tampa called Ybor City, and I decided we were going to start buying houses, renovate them, and sell them. And the problem with that area is it's a crappy area, but you can get houses cheap. But how do you, if you buy a house for $50,000 and all the other houses in that area are selling for $70,000, then even if that house needs work and you fix it up, you're only going to get an appraisal or be able to sell it for $70,000. There's no other sales available to compare it to. So if you go to Bank of America and you say, I want to buy this house for $200,000, they send an appraiser out. He looks at the house, he looks at all the comparable sales, and he goes, it's worth $70,000. And that's if it's in good shape. This place is a shithole.
So you're making nothing.
So you're going to make nothing. So I was like, so the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out how to get these things to appraise higher. So I was dating this chick that worked at a title company, right? Which is a company that helps you close loans. They're the ones that search the title in public records downtown. They do all the documents. So I was like, okay. I talked to her and I was like, listen, here's what was happening. I was like, how do you know when I buy a house? When I started telling her the situation, like I need to buy a property, but I don't want to record the sale of that property at $50,000. I want to be able to record the sale of that property at like $200,000. And I was like, how would I do that? And I knew some ways to do it, but that required the buyer's help or the seller's help.
So the previous sale for $200,000,
right? So
what it was last sold for,
right? No, what I buy it for. So let's say I come in and I'm going to buy that house for $50,000. I don't want to see anybody to see.
You wanted to say 200, yeah.
Yeah. So she said, look, all you have to do is pay the extra taxes on the sale, and then put down on the transaction paper that you bought it for $200,000. So if I paid an extra $1,000 in taxes, my sale would go from $50,000 or $60,000 and to get recorded at $200,000. So I was like, okay. So I go and I buy a house, I change the document, I pay the extra doc stamps, and I record it in public records. Shows up a month or 2 weeks later, it shows up says, boom, sale price $200,000. And I was like, oh my God. So we figured that out. So my second problem.
That's a crazy thing to do.
Right. Well, but give me that's just one house. So for every one house you're buying, you need 4 comparable sales. Obviously, you can keep using the same ones. But I saw that was possible, and I was like, okay, the problem is this. You're not going to buy that house for $200,000. Even if I can get the appraisal, a normal person is going to be like, it's a crappy neighborhood.
Yeah.
In a rundown area. Everything else is selling for $75,000 or $70,000 or $50,000 even. Like, I'm not going to pay $200,000. So I need borrowers that will pay $200,000 for these houses. So the problem, even if you could convince a borrower, let's say you said, I'll give you $20,000 to sign the papers, and I made all the documents. Those borrowers they're just not credible and they're not reliable, right? Like they lose their job, they have bad credit. So it's too difficult to find someone who's qualified. So I figured if I create my own borrowers, then I can make them qualify for the loans. So by this point, I'd figured out how to get Social Security to issue Social Security numbers to people that don't exist. right? So like I would make a fake birth certificate and a fake shot record, and I'd go into Social Security and say, hey, I have a daughter. She's 10 months old, and she's never had a Social Security number. Want you to issue one. And they would say, well, it should have been issued at the hospital. And I'd go, she was born with a midwife. Oh, they'd say like, oh, the pediatrician should have ordered. I'd go, he told me to come here and get it from you. And they go and they check their computer and they go, oh gosh, you're right. Your daughter doesn't have a Social Security number.
So are you using real people's identities?
At this point, no. This is a fake person.
But it's a fake person, but surely it has to be linked to someone. You know, who's the mother of this child?
Right. I'm the father.
You.
I'm
Sorry,
the father.
Yeah.
Or keep in mind too, at this point also, really not around this point, but it's a little bit later. It's very quickly, right after this, within months or a year, I figured out how to go into the Department of Motor Vehicles and get them to issue me they would issue me like an ID or a driver's license. So you've got the government's issuing me driver's licenses. So I could steal someone's identity. I could run an ad. Say I run an ad in South Carolina, and then the ad says, good credit, bad credit, no problem, home loans available now, call for free applications, and have a phone number. People would call and apply for mortgages. So they give me all their information. I order all their documents, their birth certificate, Social Security card, I would order their high school transcripts. I would even register to vote. They live in South Carolina. That's two states away. Every state is basically its own little government in the United States. So their DMV doesn't pull up the pictures or information from Florida. They have their own little closed system. So what happens is then I could go into Florida, register to vote in Florida as this guy, or even just make a fake lease agreement and go into the DMV and say, hey, I just moved here a couple of weeks ago. I lost my ID during the move. I'm from South Carolina. Here's my birth certificate. Here's my Social Security card. Here's my lease agreement. I need an ID. And they go, sure, no. They look and they go, sure, no problem. Stand over there. They take a picture of me. I pay them $40 or $50 for the ID. And 30 seconds later, they print one out and give it to me. I've got an ID now. I can go open a bank account. I could buy a house.
And you were getting all these loans, right, on these different identities. What would happen when you messed up the credit of that identity?
Okay, so most of the time.
Did I say that right?
Yeah. Most of the time, what I was doing initially, what I'm doing is I'm getting a Social Security card issued to someone who doesn't exist. So there is nobody connected to it.
Yeah,
like that's a person that they think that the credit bureaus believe is it's just this person who's named Lee Black, let's say. So Lee Black, I've got a Social Security number and a name, and I have a date of birth, but the credit bureaus don't know what his date of birth is. So I just put down that he was born in July 1970, and then I put his name, and I apply to get a bunch of credit cards in his name. I get denied. So then I get a couple secured credit cards, and I start building a credit history. So once I start borrowing in his name, when I stop paying those credit cards and it goes under, who do they try and who does the bank try and contact?
That person.
And who's he? Nobody. He doesn't exist.
So whose number would you give them when you put down these identities?
Who's
like phone number?
Oh, whatever phone I had. I had 6 or 8 phones.
So would you be getting calls from people
I'd get phone calls,
you would pretend to be these people?
If they called.
Did that ever get confusing?
Not really, because
they would probably answer the phone and say, hey, I'm looking for this person. You're like, okay, I'm that person. Yeah.
Well, honestly, let's say Lee Black. Lee Black has a cell phone, right? Well, it's on a bank behind my credenza. If that phone rings, I pick it up.
So how many phones did you have?
I have like 8. I had like 8 of them. So I grab one, I turn around, and it says Lee Black on a piece of paper on the back with all of his information. So I go, boom, hey, this is Lee Black. What's going on? And they go, hi, Mr. Black. I'm calling from Bank of America, and we this and we that. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Yeah, no problem. Can you verify your Social Security number? Sure. 2705-0002. What's your date of birth? 7G. It's on the back of the thing. You just, okay, so what else do you need? Like, what am I?
And if they kept calling looking for money or whatever you owed them, right?
Well, that almost never happened, honestly.
But I think I heard you say that you would create like a tragic story that happened to the person.
Yeah, no, you're jumping ahead. I thought we were just talking about like credit cards or something.
Yeah.
No. Once I created these fake people, they've got 700 credit scores. So they have perfect credit. I don't know what in South Africa. You guys have like credit scores in South Africa?
I'm useless, bro.
Oh, you don't?
I don't do my finances.
Okay. Do you have a credit card?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't even have a credit card.
Oh, Jesus. So, because I know in Europe, in different areas, they have their own systems. Like it's a slightly different system. Yeah. So, in the United States, like if you have over a 620 credit score, you can get a mortgage. My guys, as soon as they got credit scores, they were in the 700s. So an 850 is the best score you can get, and that takes like 10 or 15 years. These guys are already way higher. The average credit score in the United States is like a 650.
Yeah.
So these guys are 700, right? So actually, that's not true. The average credit score in the United States, I believe, is about 600. So these guys are 700. So what I'm saying is they would have. So my fake borrowers have 700 credit scores, and then I would buy a house in their name, record the sale price of that house at $200,000, and then I buy another house, make it 205, next one 210, next one 195. And keep in mind, I've got lots of these guys. I got a guy named Lee Black, I got a guy named Brandon Green, a guy named Michael White, a guy named William Blue, a guy named David Silver, a guy named these are all different people. Guy named James Red.
I love the colors, yeah.
Right. So I mean, there's a movie called Reservoir Dogs, which is it's funny you said you do kind of overlays. Like there's a scene in Reservoir Dogs where all the guys are walking, and what happens is they give, because they don't want to use their names. It's a crew of criminals. So instead of using their real names, they call them Mr. Pink, Mr. Black, Mr. White, Mr. Red. So and that movie had come out and I liked it. And I thought, I'm going to name all my guys, Mr. Black, Mr. White, Mr. Red. So I named these fake people that. And so now Mr. James Red has 5 houses in his name. He's got over $1 million worth of property in his name. So what I do is I prepare a loan package. I make W-2s and pay stubs for him. I make a bank account for him. I make, he's got perfect credit. I show that he has a rental history. He's been paying his rent, and he owns this house. He bought it a month ago. And then I order an appraisal. So I clean up the house. I order an appraisal. And keep in mind, the appraiser would walk out there and be like, I mean, this is a really kind of a crummy area, but this thing's worth $200,000. That house across the street just sold for $210,000. That one over there just sold for $195,000. That one over there sold for $1.
Was that raising the price in the area well?
Oh no, the area. Listen, Forbes magazine listed the Ybor City zip code as one of the top 20 fastest growing zip codes in the nation
because of what you were doing
in 2000 and 2003. So this whole area, I bought 110 houses.
I don't know if the people in the area must have loved you or hated you.
Oh, I'm sure I don't think they thought much of me, but I don't think they thought much about it at all.
Yeah.
There's so many houses, like everybody's like, well, then you raised the property. I raised the property value.
Yeah.
So you could borrow a ton of money. But then again, also probably the tax base went up too. So if you were paying $300 a year in taxes, now you're probably paying $700 or $600 or something. But I'm not concerned about those people. So my guy owns a house, 5 houses worth over $1 million. I can then turn around, get appraisals on the houses, go to Bank of America, and Bank of America says, we'll lend your houses are worth $1.2 million. We'll lend you $1 million. So I get $190,000 on one house, $210,000 on one house, $250,000 on one house, $175,000 on one house. So it ends up being like $1 million. This guy's got perfect credit. I then run up his credit cards, right? I go out and now he's got perfect credit. So I go get credit cards for $20,000, $30,000. I run up the credit cards. I make a few payments. So I refinance the houses, make a few payments, and then stop paying. So when the houses go into foreclosure, all of the banks start to make phone calls to try and get in touch with them. They start writing letters. They make phone calls. And what I would do is I would get an article from keep in mind, this is back when they had like newspapers. So I would get an article from the newspaper. Let's say there had been like a 10-car pileup on Interstate 75. Somebody ended up having to be put in a helicopter and life flighted to the local hospital. So I would retype that article, and I would put one of my guys' names in the article as being the person that was life flighted. I then print out that on newsprint, cut it up so it looked like a newspaper article, make a copy of it, and then I would write a letter from my borrower's sister, his sister, right? Because my borrower doesn't exist. And I'd say my brother was in a multi-car pileup. He's currently in a coma. The doctors say that if he ever wakes up, even if he wakes up someday, he's never going to work again. You might as well just take the house. He's never going to be able to go back to that house.
And they would stop contacting
you. They stop because here's the thing. They're talking about a guy who's with a rubber stamp, right? Like, it's just a collection agent. He's got hundreds of people not paying. He doesn't know, this sounds fishy. He looks at it and goes, okay. I have a reason why the guy's not returning phone calls. I know what happened to him. I don't have to keep looking.
Yeah. I don't think they care that much.
Right. They don't
want the hassle, yeah.
Right. So most people just don't even try. So what happens is they don't even reply to the collection agencies. So what happens is they keep looking and looking, trying to contact. Like, I don't want you to look. I want to give you an answer that satisfies you, so you'll just go on. And that's what I would do.
And you also did a fraudulent loan for a police officer.
Oh, I did. That one guy, Steve Sutton.
I'm not sure what his name was.
His name is Steve Sutton. So listen, that guy, his ex-wife at the time, they were going through a divorce. I did 8. I want to say it was 6 or 8 owner-occupied duplexes. I got her basically $500,000 worth of loans. I got him almost $1 million worth of loans. Yeah. So,
and he knew it was illegal.
Oh, he knew it was legal.
And he was just cool with it.
Yeah.
He was just like, thank you.
Yeah, he was okay. He was okay. Oh, listen, I've done fraudulent loans for lawyers, for doctors, for police. He's not the only police officer. Police officers, detectives. I've done tons of fraudulent documents. Fraudulent mortgages, sorry.
Up until that point, how much do you think you had stolen?
At that point, you mean when the FBI shows up again?
No. Just, yeah.
Yeah, 11.5 million. That's what the FBI said.
And how much were you pocketing of that money?
5, 6, maybe 6. So personally?
Yeah.
Or how much was profit?
How much were you pocketing for yourself after paying everyone?
Not that much, maybe $1 million or so, $1 million or $2 million. Well, maybe $3 million. So if there was
that's dollars.
If there was
pretty good.
Yeah, if there was $7 million profit, I probably made $3 million of that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad, but the problem was that at some point,
well, it's bad, but you know what I mean,
right? It's a nice lick. No, yeah. Listen, I'm not stealing bubble gum at the local, convenience store. I mean, if I'm going to commit a crime, it's going to be.
What were you spending it on? Were you having fun with any of it?
Yeah, I'm not a flashy guy. It's funny too. This is funny because I have had people say this on my podcast. Where I'm like, yeah, I'm not a flashy guy. I bought I bought a couple Audis. I bought a BMW. I had a nice truck. I had I renovated a really nice place in Tampa Heights. I bought some real estate. I went on vacations. I've went on a bunch of vacations. I remember I have a friend named Stacy, and she invited me that I actually used to date when I was younger in my teens. So we dated for a year or two. And so she invited me. We were always friends though. So she invited me to her wedding. I go to her wedding and I remember she goes, listen, I'm going to sit you at the table with with my bridesmaids. There's a single girl there. Don't talk to her. She goes, do you understand? She said, Matt, honestly, she's too good for you. She said, I really don't want to see you just ruin this girl. She's a sweet girl. I said, oh, it's fine. It's fine. I'm sure she's not interested in me. She goes, okay. She goes, good. So I hit the chick up all night. Like maybe less than a week later, I take her to Mexico, to Acapulco for like a week. I dated her for maybe a month and then broke up with her. So what am I doing?
Like
so,
she said, ruin her.
She just hates my guts. Like my friend Stacy was like, you dog. She thought you were amazing. I told her you were a scumbag. And I'm like, what do you want me to tell you? So anyway, her name was Christy. Anyway, so she, so I mean, that's the kind of thing. Like I'd go on vacation, go to Norway, go to England.
Kind of normal stuff for someone with a bit of money. Yeah.
But I wasn't driving. Like to me, flashy is driving a Lamborghini. Like I wasn't driving a Lamborghini, but people in the comments will be like, "Bro, you bought a couple of you bought a Mercedes, you bought a BMW."
You were living very well,
right? Yeah. To me, I didn't think I was being ridiculous.
You weren't going over the top, especially not for America. I mean, in South Africa, that would be quite big, big. But in America, I mean, it's pretty normal for people that don't make that much money to have really nice cars.
But I didn't live in like $1 million house, and I wasn't driving a $300,000 Lamborghini, which I thought that was insane. I was driving what I thought was a reasonable vehicle.
When did the Secret Service catch on to what you were doing?
Well, the FBI caught on. So I've got all of these people who are buying all this property, right? Like I bought like over 100 properties in Ybor City. We borrowed like $11.5 million. And that guy, the police officer you were talking about, he was a sheriff's deputy. I was running a scam with a buddy of mine and a girl that I was dating. And she went into a title company. She was borrowing money as a fake person. Well, no, as a real identity. We had sold someone's identity and we were using it to borrow money. She goes in to she closes a loan. She gets a check for like $100,000. Okay. She goes in to close another loan. She closes a loan, but the woman at the title company, after she signs all the documents, she gives her ID. She looks at it and she goes, "This doesn't look like you. Is this you?" And she goes, "Yeah, it's me." She goes, "Are you sure?" She holds it up and looks at her and she says, "No, something's wrong. This isn't you." But it was her. Like it was her picture. She just didn't, it was just a fluke. Like because this woman at the title company made a mistake, she said, "I'm not going to give you the check. I'm going to make some phone calls and I'm going to make some calls. Something's not right." And of course the girl, Allison, was like, "It's me." She said, even another woman came out from the title company and said, "That's her." Doesn't matter. So what ends up happening is she still has the check from the other closing. She goes, "Well, I want to cash this check." And I went, "No, we're done. We're done. That woman's going to start making phone calls. She might stumble upon the whole thing." And she was like, "No, I want to do this. She needed the money. She was like $100,000. So she gave it to a friend of mine named Travis, who had borrowed about $300,000-$400,000 running another scam I was helping him with. She gives it to him because he has a bank account, says, "Can you deposit this?" He has no problem. He deposits it. A couple of days later, the manager of the bank calls and says, "Hey, I need you to come in. I need to witness your endorsement of the back of the check." Now, I've deposited checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've never needed to witness the endorsement. And I was told him, "Don't go. Don't go." He's, "It's going to be fine. It's not a big deal. Doesn't mean anything." I'm like, that doesn't sound right at all. Something's wrong. And so he's, "It's fine." He goes in the bank. He gets arrested. He immediately cooperates. Says, "Look, I can tell you exactly what's going on. There's a guy named Matt Cox. He's already on federal probation. He's running a scam in St. Petersburg. No, not St. Pete. He's in Clearwater. He's running a one in Tampa, and he's running one in Orlando." So I've got him going all over the place. And so what do? They said, "Well, how can you prove this?" And he goes, "It's not hard to prove. Pull up public records in Hillsborough County Public Records." They pull it up. He says, "Go to the tax appraiser website, public records website." Goes to it and he says, "Look up the name Lee Black. 5 foreclosures. Look up the name James Red. 5 foreclosures. Look at the name Brandon Green. 5 foreclosures. Look up the name William William Blue. 5 foreclosures." So every foreclosure, they're all, and keep in mind, the name that they arrested him as was Michael White. White, black, red, green, blue, silver. So it's
They're like, this is full of shit. Yeah.
He looks at they look at it and they go,
this is not right.
oh, something's wrong here. Yeah. This is like, I thought I was so clever. Well, really, I was just making it easy for them to put it together.
With the color coding. You literally labeled your
labeled
crimes.
it, exactly. So could you imagine somebody pulls up and says, hey, is this one of them? No, that's not one of them. That guy's got a normal name. That guy's name is Steve Johnson. That's not him.
And how did you find out that they were investigating you?
So what happens is they put together a task force. In the United States, if there's multiple jurisdictions involved, they put together a task force, right? So like the FBI will come in, or the state will come in, and they'll oversee a task force of different agencies working together to coordinate it. They put together a task force, and they decided they investigated me, and they said, yeah, this is definitely a fraud. This is an $11-12 million fraud. Minimum. Initially they said it was like 25 million, because you'll see on there, like, people will say $25 million in Tampa. It's not. It ended up being $11.5 million. So they said $11.5 million in here, and they handed that over to the FBI. Well, my buddy, who was the sheriff's deputy, one day he comes to my office and he says, listen, man, he said, I used to date this girl who worked for Tampa Police Department. She was on a task force that was investigating you. And he said, they just handed it to the FBI. They're going to come arrest you in a couple days. I was like, holy shit. So I take off on the run. The girl I was dating at the time, she begs to come with me. I tell her I'm leaving. I'm going on the run. So she goes, can you please come with me? I'm like, yeah. I should have said no. But anyway, she comes with me. And I only had about $80,000 in cash. Like, people are like, well, you had millions. Yeah, but I had millions, but it was wrapped up in real estate. Or even if it's in the bank, like, what do? Do you hang out in Tampa and try and pull money out of the bank and get arrested? Or do you say, fuck it, I got $80,000 in cash, I'm leaving? So I took off.
Because you know you could do these scams anywhere.
Correct. So I immediately go to Atlanta with my girl that I've been dating 4 or 5 weeks. I don't even know her. Can
you tell me a little bit about it? Because they did a documentary on you.
Right.
And they called you guys the Bonnie and Clyde of, I think, real estate.
Yeah, mortgage fraud.
Mortgage fraud. Was she as bad as you were?
As far as fraud?
Yeah. Or was she just along for the ride?
She was along for the ride. Like, the truth is, like, I can't believe that she even got the time. Like, she got like 5 years, and she cooperated against me. So she ended up doing like 2 years. But I can't believe that they gave her 5 years. Like, it's ridiculous to give her 5 years. She barely did anything. So, what ended up happening was, yeah, she was in Florida because she'd worked for a lawyer in Las Vegas, and the lawyer found out that she was stealing from him. She's doing his books and she's stealing from him. But he didn't call the police on her. So she owes him like 10 or 15 grand she'd stolen from him. He didn't call the police because he was also sleeping with her. And he's married. So what he says is, you know what? I'm going to basically send you to work in Florida. Like, I want to get you out of the state and away from me, and start your life over. So he sends her to work for somebody he represents, which was the dog track, because he represented casino interests. So she comes down here, she meets me. We just started dating. And now she's on the run. 6 weeks after she gets here, she's on the run.
And was she in love with you?
She thought she said she was in love with me, but she was also bipolar.
Because that's a crazy thing to do. If you've just known someone and you find out all this stuff and you're like, okay, I'm coming.
Right, I get it, but and I understand what you're saying, but she was bipolar.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about bipolars, like, they're apt to fall in love quickly and hate your guts too. Like, they're the
extreme highs, extreme emotion, and extreme lows.
So as far as she's concerned, the last 5 weeks have been amazing. We go out to dinner all the time. We can do whatever we want. I have plenty of money. I drive brand new vehicles. I've got an amazing house. I can do whatever I want. I have tons of money. Like, she's ecstatic. She thinks she's hit the jackpot. So when I say I'm taking off, she's ready to go.
And were you scared to go on the run at first?
I was more scared to go to prison. It was more like I was too afraid to go to prison. Like, I was just like, no way I'm going to go to prison. The only movie I'd ever seen was Shawshank. It ain't good. Like Andy Dufresne, he didn't fare well.
And were you thinking you would just be on the run for the rest of your life?
Yeah,
you
I
leave
thought
behind all the people you've ever known.
Yeah, but I'm going either way. I'm going to go to prison. You know, like it's funny because like white families, and you learn this especially in prison, middle class white families will give up on their family members if they go to prison. Black families will support their family
and
when
visit them throughout.
Visit them, drag their kids, put money on their books.
So you know either way you were done for anyway.
I'm done.
And what was life like on the run? Did you continue scamming?
Yeah, because I only had like 80 grand, and so I immediately go to Atlanta. I went to Atlanta and we rented a house from a guy named Michael Shanahan. And so we rent this house, and I go down to public records and I satisfy the loans on Michael Shanahan's houses. So back to mortgages. If you buy this house, right? So I bought a house and I got a mortgage from Bank of America. Once I pay that mortgage off, how does public records know that it's been paid off? Bank of America prepares a document called a satisfaction of mortgage, and they mail it in to public records. Public records gets it. They charge them a fee to record it, like $10 or something. They record it. And now if you look at the title of my house, it says, Matt Cox owns the house. He did have a mortgage with Bank of America, but it was paid off. He now owes nothing on the house. So this guy, Michael Shanahan, had 2 mortgages on the house. So I go downtown, I'll get copies of the mortgages, I prepare a fake satisfaction of mortgage from Bank of America. I then go back and I record those, pay the fee, and I wait.
And did you travel a lot during that time? Or did you stay in one place mainly?
I mean, during a scam, I typically stayed in that general area.
And at what point were you starting to create fake passports?
So during that time period, that's basically when I start realizing, like, one of the ways I was getting IDs at that time was I was running ads. But some of those guys that I ran the ads for had DUIs. Like, they would tell you, like, I'm like, have you ever had a criminal conviction? They go, well, yeah, I've had a DUI. Like, multiple people's had DUIs. So I remember thinking, I'm stealing guys' identities who have DUIs. Like, what if this guy gets even though this one guy, this guy, Michael Eckert, I ended up getting a driver's license in his name. My fear was, what if Michael Eckert gets a DUI? Like, he's got a driver's license in Florida. I'm living in Georgia, and I've got an ID from, let's say, South Carolina or Alabama. What if Michael Eckert gets a DUI in Florida? Florida will notify all the other states this guy's got a DUI, and they'll suspend his license. So if I got pulled over as him, I'll go to jail.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what I need? I need to find people that I can assume their identity, that don't drive, and basically live off the grid. You know, what would Andrew Tate say? People that like aren't plugged into the matrix. So what I did was, one day we saw this homeless guy saying, we'll work for food, and I was like, holy shit, like, that guy's perfect. So I got out and I started asking him some questions. I said, hey, bro, I said, do you have a car? He's like, no. I was like, do you have a driver's license? It's suspended. So I asked him a bunch of questions. I gave him like $20. And while I was questioning him, he ended up asking me, what, are you taking a survey? And he goes, what are these questions for? I go, no, I'm just curious. And he goes, oh, yeah. And I said, why, do you get a lot of surveyors out here? And he goes, sometimes we get social workers that come out. They'll do surveys. And I was like, really? Like, that's good to know. So I went home. I made a survey to survey homeless people, and I started going out. I started telling homeless people, like, hey, I looked for somebody that was about my age, and I was about 35 then. And I'd go, hey, man, I work for the Salvation Army. We're trying to figure out where we're going to put our next homeless facility. Will you take a survey? And they'd be like, I'm not interested. And I go, well, it pays $20 right now. And they go, yeah. And I go, yeah. And I'd give them $20 and they'd do the survey. Well, then I'd go home and I'd order their birth certificate, their social security card. I'd order driving record. I'd order their high school transcripts. I'd register to vote as them. And then once I got those documents, I'd go into local DMV and I'd say, hi, my name is whatever the guy's name was. And they'd look at my documents and they go, yeah, no problem here. And I'd give them 20 or 30 bucks, whatever it was. And they'd say, stand over there. And I'd walk over there and they'd take a picture of me and they'd get a driver's license or an ID in their name.
If those people ever cleaned up and...
They're not cleaning up.
But I'm just saying, like, if you stole someone's identity that eventually got back into the system, you know, their whole life must be... I mean, they must have... surely there's a trail that leads to them now.
No, I mean, they don't have... Keep in mind, when I pull their credit, I'm pulling a credit using an address that has nothing to do with them.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like, nothing leads to that. Unless they got it... Let's say they...
But you're using their name.
Their name and social security number.
Yeah.
So let's say they did clean up and they went to go get credit. Are they going to get a credit card? No. It takes 7 years for all that bad debt to fall off. So in 7 years from now, their credit history would be clean. Or if, let's say 2 years later and it was bad credit and they went and they might have to write some letters and prove that they were the victim of identity theft and try and get that stuff removed, which they could do. But the likelihood that any of these guys were cleaning up their act
was not good.
Yeah. And certainly didn't ruin their life. Their lives were already ruined.
And
anyway.
How many identities did you and your girlfriend have? How many passports and different driver's licenses?
I mean, I've had 24 passports. I don't know how many. She probably had 3 or 4 passports. I've had probably 26 or 27 driver's licenses issued to me from state departments of motor vehicles. But I've had identities. I've had over 50 identities.
And what was your relationship like during that time?
Oh, with the chick?
Yeah.
She was a nightmare. Like, she was bipolar. She was up and down. She would scream in the middle of the night. She was self-medicating with, marijuana and Xanax. And what I would do is I eventually got her to go to a psychiatrist and got her on Zoloft. And so she took Zoloft for a month or two, and then she stopped taking it, and she'd get crazy again, and then she'd get back on it. Police got called several times just from her screaming, yelling and screaming. Like we're not fist fighting. We're just having an argument. And if you know anything about bipolars, like, you don't even have to you don't even have to be a part of the argument.
Yeah.
You can just be standing there going, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. Don't tell me. I hate you. And she's screaming.
Yeah.
It's like, it's 2:00 in the fucking morning and we're wanted. Like, I'm a wanted fugitive. So is she. And you're screaming.
Just
like
keep
the
it down.
cops, the cops are going to show up.
Someone's going to call for a domestic battery.
Right.
Or something.
And they did. Like, she would scream at the top of her lungs. I'd grab a bag, throw some clothes in it, and leave. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, the cops show up.
When did you start getting plastic surgery? Because you got many different kinds of surgeries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did that after Atlanta. So the Secret Service got involved in Atlanta. So you got the FBI's now looking for me. U.S. Marshals are looking for me. And the Secret Service got involved because of identity theft, right? Like, identity theft and the financial infrastructure of the United States, it falls under the Secret Service's purview. So now they're looking for me. And the difference between them and the FBI is that the Secret Service was, like, really looking for me. Like, they're running ads, they're sending out flyers.
There's like posters with your face on it.
Yeah. They're doing articles. They're participating actively on getting me on news programs.
Well, you were number 1 on the list.
Yeah, but that was probably 6 months later. But no, they elevate me to number 1 on the Secret Service's most wanted list. They've got newspaper they're trying to find me.
So you were like, I need to change the way I look.
Right. So I thought, you know what I need to do? We need to get some plastic surgery. So I got a nose job, what's called a mini facelift. I got my teeth capped. I got liposuction. And I got what's called a gynecomastia surgery, right? Like, you ever heard of guys that they call them bitch tits? You ever heard of that?
I have.
Right. So if you take steroids.
Bitch tits Bob from, what was that? Fight Club.
Fight Club.
Yeah, bitch tits Bob.
Right. So if you take steroids, you eventually end up getting bitch tits, right? So I took them when I was younger and I had, like, bitch tits, like slight, not like Bob. But I ended up getting those cut out. I got liposuction. I did everything. Changed my hair. Started changing my hairstyle. Oh, and I got 2 hair grafts. So, like, my hair in the front, they they had two hair grafts where they cut out of the back of my head and they put the hair in the front of your head. So, I did, because I was slowly going bald. So I did that too. So I did everything. I lost weight.
When were you put onto the Secret Service's most wanted list? Were you always on it, or
No. So at first they just put you on the list.
Yeah.
That was when I was in Atlanta. That would have been in 2000. That was like 2004. So by the end of 2004, they raised me to like the number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list.
And what happens when they do that? They send out flyers. They really start looking for you, right?
Yeah, I don't know that they upped it, but they definitely were. They were already doing it.
And did you have any close calls? Because you said they sent posters out. Did anyone ever recognize you or anything?
The only close call, the one I remember, was I had actually gone into a closing and I went to sign the documents, and the lawyer comes in and he sat down with me and he looked at me and he goes, okay. So he starts explaining the documents and I start signing, and then he looked at me and he goes, "Can you hold on a second?" And I go, "Sure." And I remember he closed the file and took the file with him. And I always remember that because I thought, that's weird. Like, those are my documents. Why wouldn't you leave those? And he walks in the back office, and I later found out, the Secret Service told me, he actually walked in the back office and they had my wanted poster on the wall. And he walked up and he looked at it, and he looked at me, he looked at my documents, and he went, "Well, this says this guy is wanted out of Atlanta. And this guy just moved here from Florida. And this guy's been with the same company for 5 years. So it can't be the same guy. Plus, he kind of looks like him, but not really." So he goes back in, sits down, lets me sign all the documents, gives me a check for $200,000, and lets me leave.
So all the surgery you did probably saved you there.
Yeah, at that point.
When did you eventually get caught? Or how did you eventually get caught?
So
for the last time.
Oh, the last time?
Yeah.
Like the last time I got caught was I almost got caught. I got caught in a bank in South Carolina. I got arrested and I was questioned by a detective. I was doing a scam and I had bought 2 houses in the name of a homeless guy. And I had borrowed like $1.3 million, and I was pulling money out, and the bank called the police, and I was handcuffed and questioned by a detective, and I convinced him that I hadn't done anything wrong, that the bank had made a mistake. And so he let me fill out a police report while they investigated, and they let me go. So, but at that point,
if I'm not mistaken, your poster was in that police station as well.
Yeah. Well, when I went to the police station, and they had me wait in the hallway. Because at first I was in his office, right? It was like a cubicle. And he was like, "Look, I can't leave you in my cubicle. I have to have my lieutenant sign off." He goes, "Would you mind waiting in the hallway?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." So I walk in the hallway and I'm standing there, and there's where all these posters were. And I'm looking at the posters, and there was like, there's like bike thieves, there's, motorcycle thieves, car thieves, there's bank robbers, there's rapists, there's murderers. And there was one color photo, which was my Secret Service most wanted. Everything else was copies. Black and white copies. Mine was in color.
The only one in color.
Yeah, and I was like, holy shit. And I just was turning around, and the guy walks up behind me. He goes, and I remember it was Gary Sullivan. He goes, "Hey, Gary." And I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he goes, "Hey." I said, "Everything okay?" And he goes, "Everything's great." He said, "Well, go ahead and walk outside. My lieutenant signed off on it.
Everything's just dandy."
Yeah. Walk out, get in the elevator, go downstairs. And I remember I was walking out, and I was going, "Okay, well, let me know what happens." He goes, "Hey, do me a favor." He goes, "Don't leave the area." He said, "We've got some questions." And I went, "Sure, no problem. I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I own 2 houses." And he goes, "Okay." So I get in my car, I drive to 2 more banks, pull out more money, and then get on the interstate, drive to North Carolina, because I was living in North Carolina. Go to North Carolina, pack up all my stuff, go to Houston, Texas, unload all my stuff out of my U-Haul, because Becky was living in Houston at the time. We get into a huge argument. We had $600,000 or $700,000 at the time. I take $100,000 and I leave. So I'm done with her. I leave her with like $500,000 and change. I leave her. Drive all the way back to Charlotte, North Carolina. Get my car. Because at this point, I know they're looking for me. So, because at this point, you know, I'd just been caught in the bank, so I know within a day or two, they're going to figure it out. So it's now been 2 or 3 days. So I get my car, drive across the street from my apartment complex to get a Starbucks before I figure out where I'm going to go. So I'm in the Starbucks getting coffee, just waiting. And I notice that there's 2 of the employees for my apartment complex getting coffee. And they're looking at me like, you know, they're pointing and everything. And I'm like, the fuck's going on? You know, like, and you know what? All I could think of was that my rent was due on the 1st and it was like the 4th. And I thought, my rent's late? Like, I understand my rent's late, like, but it's only a day or 2. And the woman ends up going out the back of the Starbucks, right? But it's downtown, right? So there's a front and a back entrance. She leaves. I get my Starbucks. He gets his Starbucks. I walk outside. The guy follows me outside, holding like a tray of Starbucks, just staring at me. And, you know, I almost was like, what the fuck? What's your problem? But I'm trying to get out of Dodge, you know? So I get in my car. I put my Starbucks down. I put my seatbelt on. I play with the radio. I check the thing. I'm about to leave. He's still standing on the sidewalk. And all of a sudden he starts screaming, he's right here. He's right here. And I look in the rearview mirror and there's two guys running towards the back of my car. And I don't know who it is. I remember at the time I thought it was the FBI, but later I ordered the documents, you know, in my case, and I found out it was actually the U.S. Marshals. But you know, keep in mind, I just look and I'm like, oh shit, boom, hit the gas, wham, I take off. I mean, it sounds more dramatic than it actually is because obviously I was already pulling out. There was no cars. It's not like I fishtailed down the road. But I take off. I drove straight down the street about half a mile, pulled over at a homeless shelter, and interviewed 3 guys. With the Secret Service down the street. So, because I have no identity. Think about my identities now. I have to give them another. Yeah, I stop. I interview 3 homeless guys, give them fucking $20 a piece, get their information, drive straight to Nashville, Tennessee. I rent an apartment. I order the documents of all these guys. Within a week, I get the first one that shows up. I get. His name was Marion Carter. No, his name was Joseph Marion Carter Jr. So I got all of his information. I drive straight to the DMV. I get a new driver's license. I then get in my car. I was driving an Infiniti G35. Like they just come out at like 380 horsepower. It's great. So I drive all the way back from Nashville all the way back to Charlotte. I leave the car in long-term parking, get on a plane, fly back to Nashville. Buy a new car because I didn't want them the authorities to find that vehicle in Nashville, right? I don't want them to know where I'm at. So that's why I had to drive it back. So I then go out and I buy 4 houses in an area just outside of Nashville called J.C. Napier. And I record I'm buying these houses for like 50 grand a piece. And I record the value at like 210, 180, 190, 170. And I refinance them and I pull out some money out of that. Then I borrow some more. I end up buying 20 houses. I borrow like $3.5 million. Plus, so I get $3.5 million. I end up meeting this chick. We start a development company. We're just kind of, you know, flipping houses, doing, you know, whatever. We're traveling. I mean, you know, keep in mind, I went to Jamaica, went to Mexico, went to Bermuda. She and I went to Croatia. We went to Italy. Sorry, to Italy. We went to Croatia. We went to Greece. But we're traveling and just, you know,
having some fun.
Yeah, just having fun. And we're buying houses and selling them and renovating them. We're building new houses. Like, you know, you got to do something. So we're doing that. We're hanging out. And suddenly this TV show called Dateline NBC, you know what that is? It's a TV show.
Yeah.
Dateline NBC is coming out. And she's going on the internet and she sees that Dateline is coming out and they're doing a show on me. And
while you were still on the run.
While I was on the run. So that ain't good. So like if the local newspaper runs a...
Because then everyone knows who you are. That's not just the authorities and the people looking at the posters. That's like everyone watches TV at that time.
So there's been like 50 or 60 articles on me. But think about it. If if in Tampa, Florida, they run an ad or run an article and I'm on the front page in Tampa, who gives a shit? Nobody's going to recognize me in Nashville. Same thing in Atlanta. Same thing in Charlotte, North Carolina. Even in Chicago. I was on the Chicago Tribune did like a three-part series called The Fugitive. You know, and listen, I had been in Fortune magazine. They ran an ad or ran an article. I was in Bloomberg, ran a couple of articles. Like I had been in a bunch, but what does it matter? Like those are, but this was a national program.
TV.
Yeah. And somebody is going to say, hey, I know that guy. He comes into Starbucks every day. And they're going to call the authorities, and the authorities are going to be waiting at the Starbucks when I walk in one day. So I saw that and I was like, oh, I got to go. I can't do this. So my girlfriend and I start refinancing all of our properties to pull out money. And we were going to go to Australia, because Australia at the time had a policy where if you went there with like $100,000 and a business plan, you could go to Australia, open a business, and they would make you a permanent resident alien. You couldn't vote. You cannot get a job, but you can start a business. Now, I'm going to show up with a couple million.
They're going to love you there.
Yeah. Now, you could become a citizen, but you had to give them your fingerprints. Like, I don't want to give you my fingerprints. So I'm going to go to Australia, and I'm going to start this business, and it's going to be great. And so we're pulling money out of the bank, and my girlfriend ends up confiding in a friend of hers that that I'm a wanted fugitive, wanted by the FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, and we're pulling out millions of dollars out of the bank, and we're going to go to Australia. So her friend calls the Secret Service, and the Secret Service gives her $10,000 to tell them where I'm at. And a couple days later, they arrest me. They stake out my house, and I come home one day, and they arrest me.
So you went to trial, right?
No. I'm guilty.
So you don't go to trial if you're guilty?
I can't go to trial.
You just plead guilty, otherwise they'll bury you, right?
Right. I plead guilty. Yeah, I get 26 years.
And how long was you were sentenced for 125?
No,
like you could have faced that amount.
You're okay. So if they ran everything concurrently, the number I'd always heard was 154 years.
Yeah.
So it's like 150 years. That's if they run everything concurrently, right? So if they stack, if they 10 years for this, 10 years for this, 15 years for this, 7 years for this, 12 years for this, you start adding them up, right?
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I could be facing, but technically that's probably the most.
Will never happen, really,
right.
Yeah.
Most I was probably facing was 32 years.
And what were you charged with?
I was charged with aggravated identity theft, which means you stole someone's identity. So aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, government document fraud, social security fraud, social security document fraud. I was passport fraud, use of a fraudulent passport, application of a passport, and there's something else in there. I know that's it. Wire and another wire fraud or something. Yeah. So.
And how did you take it?
I mean, badly. Yeah. Like when I got sentenced, like I cried like a small child.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted you to say it.
I was going to say like, I mean, you've never seen anybody. You've probably never cried to that.
I almost went to jail, and believe me, I bawled my eyes out.
Oh my God.
You don't want to go to jail in South Africa.
No. I can imagine.
Did they give you opportunities before going into jail to cooperate and get a lesser sentence?
Yeah, to snitch on everybody? Absolutely. And I would love to tell you that I was a gangster, and I said, man, fuck you, I ain't telling on nobody. Listen, I told on everybody I could think to tell on. Every single person I could think to tell on. But the truth is, after 3 years, everybody had already cooperated against me.
Yeah.
Like, who am I going to cooperate against? They've already told on me.
And got deals or whatever.
They've got deals. They've gone to prison, or they didn't go to prison at all. They weren't, So there wasn't much I could do. So I ended up going to prison. I got 26 years. I went to prison. The government asked me if I would be interviewed by Dateline.
So they did the piece on you before, and now they want to do one with you.
Yeah, exactly. They had already done a 1 hour program. So you can imagine sitting there with 100 guys watching your TV program on you, on Dateline. Like, it was like these guys are just like, bro, like that. Like, half of them think you're amazing. The other guys are like, man, you're a scumbag.
Sick, yeah.
Yeah, you're a scumbag. Like, I'm a scumbag. You're here for committing, murder. Like, like you killed somebody. I'm a scumbag.
Oh, you're saying people in the prison were watching it?
Yeah, guys in prison are like, bro, that's fucked up. I'm fucked up. You make methamphetamine for a living. You were selling it to school kids. I'm fucked up. Like, you were running a meth lab in a double wide, a block away from an elementary school.
Yeah.
So
I mean, let's get real. You are crazy.
Oh yeah, I've got some issues, but my God, I mean,
the double standard going on.
I was gonna say the guy who's selling pictures of 12-year-olds on the internet, like, he says, "Oh, that's fucked up, bro." Me? I fucked up. They caught you with 1,400 images of 7-year-old girls.
So you did this interview with Dateline?
Yeah, I did the interview with Dateline, and so what happens is they come to the prison and everything. Like, they interview me, and they run it. And so the government said, if you do this interview, we'll consider it. It's called substantial assistance, right? We'll consider it substantial assistance, and we'll reduce your sentence. And I was like, oh, okay. So my lawyer's like, you got to do it. It's your only prayer. You're going to get 26 years. So I do the interview, and then when I go to be sentenced, we said, okay, well, what are you going to recommend? How much of a reduction are you going to recommend for Mr. Cox? And they went, yeah, we've thought about it. We saw the interview. It's really not enough. Yeah, but you said you'd consider it substantial assistance. And they said, we did consider it, and it's not enough. So they didn't give me anything. So then I go to prison. I get 26 years. I go to prison.
Continue.
I go to prison. And while I'm in prison, the government said there's a program called American Greed. And the government said, hey, we want you to do American Greed, and we'll consider it substantial assistance. Like, I know last time we didn't, but the two of these together will definitely be considered substantial assistance. I said, okay. So I'm interviewed by Dateline, by American Greed, and the program comes out, and we go back to the government. We said, hey, okay, we did it. It came out. And they said, yeah, I know. It just really just wasn't enough. And so then I'm contacted by a company so all mortgage brokers in the United States and loan officers have to take 8 or 9 hours of continuing education every year. 3 hours of that course are on ethics and fraud. So I was contacted by a school that teaches that course, and they said, we want you to write an ethics and fraud course with us. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. Absolutely. So they go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The U.S. Attorney's Office says, look, we want you to do this. If you do this, we'll reduce your sentence. So I go. I do it. I write the course. They use the course. They use the course to this day. And we go back to the U.S. Attorney, and they said, yeah, it's just not enough. So I end up having a guy in prison, a disbarred attorney. He files what's called a 2255. It's a motion where you basically say, my lawyer is ineffective. My lawyer did not do a good job. And, genuinely, I didn't realize that there was a possibility I wasn't going to get my sentence reduced, or that I could do all these things and not get it reduced. She keeps telling me to do it, but there's no benefit to me to it. And so this guy files that motion, and
so a lawyer in prison,
a disbarred attorney in prison who is.
Can you tell me about him? Because he
mentally
just tell
unstable.
me a bit about him. Yeah.
So he's what's called a rapid cycling bipolar. That's a condition he has. So he's a rapid cycling bipolar with features of schizophrenia. So in his depression and in his mania, he believes that God is talking to him. And since he was in his early teens, his name's Frank Amadeo. I wrote a book about him, bro. Like and matter of fact, a bunch of YouTubers have done videos on him. God, that would be great if you could interview him. Anyway, Frank, since he was in his teens, he has believed that God is telling him he is preordained to be emperor of the world. I'm not sure what that means, but he's going to rule the world. And so he became a lawyer. He started started working with companies and investing in companies and buying companies that were going under. He became a venture capitalist, start investing in companies, turning them around. So he puts together a bunch of companies, and ultimately he ends up with this massive company, right? He has like 40,000 employees. He's having meetings with George Bush in the White House. He backed the NATO summit one time. He's got a huge private militia. He's got contracts with in Afghanistan. So he ends up becoming running this massive conglomerate. And what ends up happening is the way he's funding a lot of this is he's withholding payroll taxes to the IRS. So if you have a bunch of employees and you pay an employee $100,000 a year, what people don't realize is that, one, you have to withhold the taxes to pay the IRS, right? So if I pay you $100,000, I might withhold $20,000 that I'm supposed to send the IRS. He's not sending it to the IRS. He's keeping it. And he's using that money to do things like try and buy used F-15s, right? Like he's trying to buy a squadron of like 20 F-15s. He's building a militia. He backs a political coup in the Congo. There's even a documentary about it called 9 Days in the Congo. Anyway, he ends up stealing like almost $200 million from the federal government, and he gets prosecuted and is sentenced, and I think he gets 22 years in federal prison. And when he goes to federal prison, he starts doing other inmates' legal work for free, just to have something to do.
Pass the time, yeah.
Pass the time. So, lots of people do things to pass the time, right? Like some people, they learn how to play the guitar. Some people play softball.
Go back to education. And
right. He decides, I wrote true crime books. Anyway, what ends up happening with Amadeo is he starts doing guys' legal work. So he does my legal work, and he gets 7 years knocked off my sentence. Because he goes to the government and says, you can't do this. You have to reduce this guy's sentence. They say no. They fight.
Because of all the things you had done.
Right. But
and the promises they had made and not kept.
But first of all, legally, they don't have to do it. Like what I found out very quickly is that legally you can't force them to file it. But he badgered them to such a degree and made a legal argument to such a degree that they finally filed for a reduction. They gave me a lawyer. The lawyer comes down. The lawyer's like, look, the government's going to reduce your sentence. So I was like, okay. And I remember the lawyer they gave me that comes down to talk to me and says, look, I'm going to represent you in your sentence reduction. And she's like, look, I read all your legal work. And I was like, oh, I didn't write that. Frank wrote that. She's like, who's Frank? And I explained who Frank is. And she's like, you've got a mentally disabled, someone who's got a mental condition doing your legal work. And I'm like, yeah.
And he's doing better than anyone else's.
Better than anybody. Because every lawyer I contacted on the street told me this can't be done. And Amadeo got 7 years off my sentence.
Jesus.
So then what happens is I go to court. I get 7 years knocked off. I come back. And I'm sure you've heard me say this before. I went to Frank, and we had hoped for, we wanted like 13, 14 years knocked off. And I got 7. And so I went to him and I was like, Frank, I appreciate everything you've done, but I was really hoping for more than 7 years. And he goes, yeah. He said, looks like we're going to have to eat this elephant one spoonful at a time. And I was like, what? And he said, something will happen. Something will come up. We'll get some more time off. He said, you're not going to do the rest of this time. And I was like, okay, well, thank you. But I remember thinking I had like 9 more years left. And I thought, I'd already done 7. I can do 9. At least by that point, you can do it. Well, within 6 months, honestly, it might have been 3 or 4 months, I'm walking around the compound with this guy named Ron Wilson. Ron Wilson stole $57 million from pension funds and churches, running a Ponzi scheme. A straight con man. Just, nobody liked him. He was cooperating. So he's snitching on his co-defendants. I loved Ron Wilson. I thought he was great. He was super arrogant, very gruff, reminded me of my dad. So I liked him. We hung out, and I remember he kept complaining about how he thought the government wasn't going to reduce his sentence. He had gotten 19 and a half years. and he'd only been in like a year or so. And he was like, yeah, they're not gonna reduce my sentence. And I kept saying, why do you keep saying that? And so he goes, they think I've hidden money. They think I didn't give them all the money back. And he had actually literally dug up like $6 million and gave it to him. And he said, they think I kept some money. And I went, well, you didn't, so don't worry about it. He's like, no, but they're going to fuck me. They're going to fuck me over. Okay. Well, one day after months of this, I said to him, after months of this, I was like, why do you keep saying this? Like, they can't prove that you had money, unless you hid money. And he goes, can I be honest with you? He goes, can I trust you? And I went, probably not. And he started laughing. He goes, and he goes, I did hide some money. And I said, well, who's got it? I said, would you bury it? He goes, no, I didn't bury it. He said, I gave some money to my ex-wife or my wife, which was in the process of divorcing him. I gave some money to her, and I gave some money to my brother. He's got a little bit of money. My brother's got like 30 grand. And my ex-wife, I gave her, 50 grand. He goes, but I'm afraid my ex-wife's going to turn in the money because she found out I was having an affair. Keep in mind, this guy's like 60-something years old. He's an old horn dog. So he had been sleeping with this chick for a couple of years, and the wife found out. So he's like, I'm afraid she's going to try and fuck me over because if he's trying to get off like 5 or 7 or 8 years off his sentence. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, don't worry. I doubt your ex-wife's going to do, or your wife's going to do that. Oh, you don't know her. She hates me. Oh, okay. So I talked like a month later, I happened to call my lawyer who'd represented me. Remember the one that flew down? Mm. So I called her because I had gone, remember I went back to sentencing and I wanted a copy of my transcripts because I had written a memoir about myself and I wanted to, but it hadn't been published. I wanted to include some of the excerpts from that sentencing or that resentencing. So I called her up and asked her, and she goes, she goes, yeah, I'm going to order it for you. I got it. I have a note. I'll send it to you. I said, okay. She goes, so what's going on? I go, I just need my transcripts. And she goes, well, everything okay in there? And then this is a woman who never wanted to talk to me. Like your lawyers don't want to talk to you. Mm. And I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. She goes, anything happening? Like, what's going to be happening? And I'm like, and I just remember thinking, it's weird that she's like, and I went, you know what? I said, something happened the other day. This guy here named Ron Wilson, he told me where he's hidden some money. But I remember thinking the government wouldn't reduce my sentence because I told them where some money was because they didn't want to reduce my sentence anyway for the stuff I did do. So if I go to them and say, hey, look, I know this, they're going to be like, oh, wow, great. Thank you. Fuck off. So I tell her anyway, and she goes, well, let me look into it. So about a week later, a correctional officer comes up to me and goes, hey, you got to go up to the lieutenant's office to SIS. And I go, okay. So I go there, and the guy puts me on the phone with a Secret Service agent. He goes, hey, they want to talk to you. I go, okay, what's up? And he goes, hey, I understand you know where Ron Wilson hid some money. And I go, well, I do, but I don't think it's very much. And I said, I want to make sure I need something that says you're going to reduce my sentence. So he gets the U.S. attorney to write a letter saying they'll reduce my sentence if they collect any money or there's any indictments. And I work with these guys back and forth for the next month or two. And eventually I tell them where the money is. They question the wife. The wife walks in and hands over $350,000, not $150,000. And the brother comes in and hands over $150,000. And so they re-indict Ron Wilson. And I remember Wilson came to me and he goes, you're not going to believe this. And I go, what? He goes, I've been indicted. I'm like, no. He goes, yeah, they indicted me. I just talked to my lawyer. I said, that's insane. What happened? He goes, well, they went to go question my ex-wife. I told you they were going to. I said, oh my God. And he said she came in and she gave him $350,000 in cash and gold and silver. And I go, $350? I thought she said it was like $100, $150. He said, I know. I didn't think I could trust you. So I didn't want to tell you the right amount. I said, I understand. Understandable. And then he says, my brother then came in and gave $150,000. I said, $150? I thought it was like 20 or 30. He goes, no, it was more than that. Like I said, I didn't know if I could trust you. I said, okay. And he says, yeah, they indicted me and I got to go back to sentencing. And I said, okay. So a couple days later, they put him on a bus. They sent him back to South Carolina. And then when he gets there, he pleads guilty. His wife pleads guilty. She gets a year probation. His brother pleads guilty. He gets like a a year probation and like one of them got like 20 hours or 50 hours community service or something. It was ridiculous, like nothing. And then Ron Wilson got 6 more months added onto his sentence. So that's nothing. He went from 19 and a half years to 20. And by the way, since then, about 4 years later, he got out on COVID. There was a COVID policy that said if you were over like 60,
you can get out.
You can get out.
So there was no real harm done there.
There's no real harm done.
Except he
not that
got out and he's broke now.
Yeah, not that I care. But so anyway, so what happens is we go to the government and so my lawyer goes to the government and says, hey, we want you to reduce Mr. Cox's sentence. And the government says, it really wasn't enough. So I go back to Frank Amadeo. Frank files.
The crazy attorney.
Crazy lawyer files again for me. Files another 2255 on my behalf. Files it. And the government, in their response to 2255, by the way, was, Your Honor, we don't even know what Mr. Cox is talking about. We didn't have an agreement with him. I actually had a letter from the government saying they would reduce my sentence. So we send that to the judge. The judge immediately orders an evidentiary hearing. And so before we can go to the evidentiary hearing, which is an evidentiary hearing is when both parties go back in front of the judge and you can show them evidence. So the government doesn't want that. So they immediately say, we'll reduce your sentence. And Frank gets another 5 years knocked off my sentence. Well, by this point, he's got 5 years knocked off my sentence. I've only got like a year or so left. They put me in for a halfway house. I get 7 months halfway house. So within like a year, I'm out of prison.
You must have loved him, eh?
Of course. I owe that guy everything.
And just coming towards the end, can you tell me a little bit about prison? What's prison like in America? The prison you were in.
The prison, like, it's not like
Was it a rough one?
No. Like I was at the medium. I went to a medium security prison first. That's a normal prison. Like that's the kind of prison you see in the movies. People are getting stabbed. There's riots. People are getting shot. Like there's things are happening, right?
What was the craziest thing you saw in prison? I know that's a common question, but
so this is the worst thing I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
Is not what you think. The worst thing I ever saw was just this pure humiliation. It wasn't somebody getting, like I've seen people get stabbed. I've seen them get hit in the head with locks. The thing that was the most just horrifying to me was I was sitting in the library one day and there was this gay guy, a punk. They call them punks, right? So there's a gay guy there. Probably thin gay guy. He's reading like a magazine, right? He's reading like a Vogue magazine. Flipping the magazine. He's got hair braids, right? Like spot on, like you would think, mannerism, this is a woman. And this massive, massive black guy comes in. He's got to be 6'2", looks like he's on steroids, just massive. Comes in the library, and you could tell he's never been in the library. Like everybody in the library, there are tables kind of like this. There's like 12 of them, and 1 or 2 guys at each table because we're spread out. There's not a lot of people in the medium in the library. And this guy walks in and everybody goes, like, holy shit, look at that. He walks up to the gay guy and he goes, can I talk to you outside? The gay guy flips. The punk flips, flipping the pages. And he goes, the guy looks around. Like everybody's staring, but as he looks around, everybody goes, nobody makes eye contact. And then we'll look back and he goes, can I talk to you outside? Punk says nothing. He goes, baby, please. Baby, please. Can I talk to you outside? Baby, please. And his baby goes, I don't like the way you talk to me in front of your friends. And he goes, baby, please. Baby, please. Can I talk to you outside? I was so humiliated for this guy. It was, and he even goes and he touches the punk, and the punk goes, oh, like that. And he goes, oh, baby, please. Baby, please, can I talk to you outside? Please, baby, please. And this is his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And they're having a fight in the middle of the library. Listen, it was the most humiliating thing I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, the guy gets up, he's walking, he put his hand on his back, goes, don't touch me. And he's like, oh, sorry, baby, I'm sorry. Looks around at everybody, we're all like, whoo! We're all looking right back at our fucking papers and reading our books and like, I'm not looking. It was horrible. They go outside, they come back inside, they go back outside. It was horrible.
And Also,
Is that not what you expected?
yeah, no.
You think a knife fight?
Funnily enough, I actually heard a little bit of that story. I never heard the full story though. I heard the first part. I didn't hear the second part.
But then I went to the medium. The medium was more like a rough high school.
Okay.
Like a really rough high school.
Yeah.
There's still stabbings, people getting fights all the time, but basically
Not as bad.
Yeah, you keep your head down. Look, most people that get hurt in prison had it coming. They snitched on somebody, or they ran up a debt, or they gambled, or they talked bad about somebody, or they disrespected somebody. But I say please and thank you. I don't borrow money. I don't gamble. I'm very polite. You know?
And what was life like when you got out? What was that first day like when you first walked out?
You know, like prison's very there's very much a routine. So I remember, like, you know, you're literally like at 4 o'clock, like I'm waiting to be counted. The whole time I got out, I was waiting for the police to show up and say, we have a search warrant for you, or we have a warrant for your arrest. You shouldn't have been allowed to leave. It was a mistake. After 13 years, it's all you know.
You forget everything else.
Yeah. I mean, and you're so used to, like, around 3 o'clock, 3:30, I start thinking, I need to be in my cell. I need to wait to be counted. You know, I have to be standing up waiting to be counted. Like so what is it like? Like it's surreal. Like it's, you know, yeah, it's bad. You know, it's a very odd, it takes 6 months, at least 6 months before you don't feel like you're not supposed to be out of prison.
Yeah, it's like me coming here from South Africa driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah.
I keep wanting to go back on the other side of the road.
You know you're doing the right thing, but it's not natural.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel right.
It's not natural, yeah.
Right.
And do you have any regrets?
I mean, absolutely. Tons of regrets. I mean, I have a son that doesn't talk to me. My dad died when I was in prison. You know, I got out just in time to be able to spend like a couple years with my mother before she has a stroke. You know, I was there when she had her stroke. I was able to hold her hand when a week later when she took her last breath. So, you know, I mean, like, I'm 50, what am I, 53 now. I was 49 when I got out. I'm 53 now, and I'm starting over with absolutely nothing. So, you know, I always see these podcasts where these guys go, oh, I've got no regrets. It made me the person I am today. I mean, the person I am today is a broke 53-year-old starting his fucking life over with nothing but horrible things on the internet. And, you know, I mean, like, so I don't know what those guys, my whole life is filled with regrets. You know, so I mean, it's, you know, so yeah, I mean, are there regrets? Yeah, I got a whole life full of regrets. It's all regrets. Like, you know, was it worth it? I always love the guys that say, you know, was it worth it? No, it wasn't worth it. Of course it wasn't worth it. I did 13 years in prison. Like, listen, I'm going to make the best of any situation. That's it. Like, there's not a lot of great things about being me. But the one thing is I am an opportunist, and I'm always going to make the best of a bad situation. Whatever situation I'm in, I will get the most out of it. So am I going to get the most out of this? Absolutely. But you know, my life is just nothing but fucking regrets. So, yeah.
Well, on that note, no.
You know, I can't even tell that story without tearing up.
Yeah,
like, I can't even think about it. I can't even think about it. I mean, I have probably 10 different stories things that somebody can ask me, and I immediately start tearing up. And if I really get into the story and start talking about it, I'll just start crying like a baby. Like, every time. And the thing is,
what's one of those stories?
Oh, I mean, anything. You know, I think about, you know, my dad, my son,
your family.
Leaving prison.
How do you think they felt while you were on, like, the run? And how do you think that?
Oh, you know, it's horrible. Like, my mother, you know, your mother loves you. You know what I'm saying? So I got a mother that doesn't know where I am. She's getting the U.S. Marshals are knocking on our door every 2 weeks. The FBI's coming by and banging on the door. Like, I mean, you know, I'm like, it's just a bad situation for them. You know, they don't know where I am. You know, it's just, you know, it's nothing but, you know, but putting everybody you care about, you know, through hell. And then you get out of prison, and then people don't want to talk to you. It's funny too, because the people that I know that went to prison because of me. Like they got in trouble. They did things because I asked them to do. They were indicted and they went to prison. Like those people all talk to me. The people that got away, made millions of dollars and then got away with it, never went to prison. They don't want to talk to me. Like, so it's the people that don't owe you anything that stand by you. And the people that you think you owe me, they walk away. They walk away from
They're
it.
just like, I got what I needed. I'm
right,
done.
right.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm too scared, or I don't want to be involved. I know.
I think often people have like this weird sense of I'm better than you.
Oh, yeah.
You got caught.
Right. Or they think they're,
Yeah.
I've met people, I met a woman that I got a couple $1 million worth of loans for, all fraudulent. Like everything she has right now is based on the fact of how I set her up. To this day, when I've seen her, she looks at me like I'm a scumbag. Like, you committed a couple $1 million in fraud. All the properties that you have right now and you collect rent on, I got you, and they were all fraudulent mortgages. And you're looking at me like I'm a scumbag. The truth is, you're a scumbag too.
You just didn't get caught.
Didn't get caught.
That's how I used to feel when back in my using days. I had a bad drug problem, and I got arrested, and all my friends looked at me. I was a criminal now. Like, Josh got arrested. All their parents were like, it's like your kids are doing the same freaking thing.
Right? Yeah, you're all criminals just because.
Just because I got caught. Now I'm a criminal.
Right.
And you didn't get caught. Now you're fine and. Good boy.
Yeah,
Such a good boy.
Yeah, it's only a matter. And you know, look, God bless them.
Yeah.
But it's probably just a matter of time before they get caught. And then suddenly, then they'll show up at your house and be like, hey, bro, want to hang out, man? Fuck you.
But anyway, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and letting me use your studio.
Sure.
So do you want to tell people where they can find you? I know you're an author as well.
Yeah, I've written, you know, it's funny because that's what I do now. I have a podcast, right? Like I have it's Matthew Cox, Inside True Crime.
Is it on Spotify, YouTube?
Yeah, it's on Spotify, YouTube. But I mean, it's, you know, we basically focus, you know, we focus on YouTube.
Me too, yeah.
And, you know, and then the other stuff just kind of spins off. And then I wrote a memoir. And I've written about 7 true crime books. And, you know, I've optioned the life rights. When I was in prison, I wrote a bunch of guys' books. I optioned the life rights for several guys.
One of them was Ephraim Devroli.
One of them was Ephraim Devroli,
who was in the movie War Dogs. I interviewed his partner not so long ago.
Yeah, he was played by Jonah Hill in the movie War Dogs.
Yeah.
I wrote his memoir. And I know Packows, you know, also.
David Packows, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I've written a bunch of stories. I got some guys in Rolling Stone magazine. I've optioned the life rights for several guys. I got supposedly a movie's being made about one of my stories, Generation Oxy.
Amazing.
My book is called Shark in the Housing Pool. It's on, you know, everything's on Amazon and Audible.
Amazing. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
And thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wide Awake podcast, and I'll see you all very soon. Cheers.